In this video, I'm going to take a look at two sets of rare and rather fascinating old lenses that adopted the famous Biotar lens design for 58mm f2 lenses. The same design used for the popular Soviet Helios 44 series lenses with M42 mounts, including this early silver Helios 44, Helios 44M, and Helios 44M4, and others. The four lenses I'm going to show you do not have M42 mounts. They're two Helios 44s made for start cameras in the Soviet Union between 1958 and 1964 with a start mount. One has 13 blades and the other has 8 blades. And then two Haiou-64 lenses made for Seagull cameras in China with a Minolta bayonet mount from 1964. The one with the chrome nose is the earlier version. I hope I've got the pronunciation of the Chinese lens name correct. If not, apologies in advance. Now, I've been a fan of Helios 44 series lenses for a long time, and the Helios 44-2 was one of the first old lenses I tried on my first digital camera. Since then, I've been collecting Helios 44 series lenses, all in M42 mounts, and I posted YouTube videos on various lenses and how and why they swirl. Viewers of these videos have alerted me to other versions of the Helios 44's Biotar design, including M42 mount lenses such as the wonderfully named Cosmogon, a rebranded version of the Helios 44M, as well as these Start and Seagull camera versions. The really interesting thing about these lenses is that Rumours suggests they're actually the best of all Biotar copies, superior to the best M42 mount Helios lenses. I'll begin with these rumours about why the lenses are so good, show you the lenses in more detail, and then discuss how they perform, on their own and compared with the M42 mount lenses. Starting with the Start Helios 44, I just had to say that, the camera's mechanical design is clearly influenced by the 35mm SLR Exacta cameras, as we'll see in a moment. The camera and lenses were made at the KMZ factory near Moscow, and they were aimed at the professional market in the USSR and were also exported. My version of the camera is the first export version, with its name in modern Latin script rather than Russian Cyrillic script. The camera's only dedicated lens turned out to be the Helios 44, although the camera did come with an adapter for M39 screw-mount zenith lenses. The rumour about the camera's Helios 44 lens is that the Soviets were so keen to produce the best possible performing lens that they selected the best-made silver Helios 44s as they came off the production line. That's a nice story, but it can't be true, as the lens itself is nothing like the M42 mount Helios 44, as you can see as soon as the start camera rotates. The camera has Exacta's rather flamboyant mechanism for closing down the aperture blades from wide open, while at the same time firing the shutter. The shutter button sits behind the stop-down mechanism. So the Start Helios 44 lens isn't at all shaped like a normal M42 mount Helios 44, and they're definitely not interchangeable. You couldn't simply pick the M42 lens off the production line for smart cameras. Because it has that large, Exacta-style stop-down knob on the side, the Start Helios only needs a single aperture ring, positioned at the back, rather than the two preset aperture rings located at the front of the M42 Helios. With the Start Helios' stop-down mechanism, you select your chosen f-stop, focus the lens wide open, and then when you want to take a photo, you push in the knob. Another very helpful feature of the knob is that if you twist it, it also stops down the lens, so you can stop down without actually taking a photo. Given these significant differences, my guess is that if the rumour about the superiority of the Start Helios 44 is true, perhaps the engineers were selecting the best glass elements from the production line, and they put that glass in the Start Helios lenses. While we're on the subject of glass elements, the Start Helios with 13 blades has a distinctive purple tint to the glass, not unlike the very early Helios 40s, and the purple tint is there also for the 8-bladed version, but it's less obvious. The M42 Helios 44 also has this purple tint, as you can see here. Both the start camera and the lens are very solidly built. I like the way the camera feels in the hand. The controls are smooth and well positioned, and the view through the viewfinder is big and bright. Plus, like Exacta cameras, the viewfinder detaches, so you can look at a top-down view. I'm not so keen on the lens mount. It's a breech-lock bayonet mount, and it's a pain. And the additional pain is that the main manufacturers of lens adapters don't make an adapter for modern digital camera mounts. I bought my adapter from a guy in Ukraine. It's 3D printed, and it works just fine, including infinity focus. Compared to the M42 mount Silver Helios, the Start Helios 44 feels more substantial. Its body parts aren't as loose-fitting as my copy of the M42 Helios. Both lenses have that classic Carl Zeiss Jena Biotar 6 elements in 4 groups design, and there are some similarities in how the names of the lenses evolved. The earliest silver lenses of both types had a red character for coatings engraved on the front of the lens, and the length was engraved in centimeters, not millimeters. Later, the red character disappeared, and millimeters appeared, as you can see with my lens. Both sets of lenses were made over time with different numbers of aperture blades, the more desirable and earlier lenses having 13 blades, the later lenses having 8 blades. I won both my 13 and 8-bladed lenses in an auction, sold with one camera, and at the time I wasn't exactly sure why the owner needed both versions, something I'll return to later. So that's the Start Helios 44. Now let's turn to my small flock of seagulls. Another phrase I'm afraid I couldn't resist. The Seagull Camera Company was founded in Shanghai, China in 1958 and started out making twin-lens reflex cameras. The company's first SLR camera, with interchangeable lenses, was launched in 1964 and was based on the Minolta SR2. It has a Minolta bayonet lens mount, and Haiou was the brand name used for the lenses. The Seagull on the left is one of the early versions, and I'm very grateful to TT Artisan for buying me a copy in China, as I found it hard to find a good copy in Europe. Ironically, not long after I received the first Seagull camera from China, I spotted a later version for sale in London called a DF1 that was launched in 1969. DF are the Chinese equivalent letters for SLR. The Haiou lens on the DF1 is all black, and the camera also came with a 28 to 70mm zoom lens, branded with the Seagull name, but a version of a Minolta MD zoom. The cameras are solid and functional, but they're not nearly as ergonomically satisfying to use as, say, a contemporary Pentax Spotmatic, and they are surprisingly heavy. They weigh 983 grams with the lens, compared to the Start camera's 916 grams. I normally associate Soviet gear with the heavyweights. The Haiou-64 Minolta mount lenses have the Biotar optical design with 6 elements in 4 groups. The two lenses both have 6 aperture blades and a minimum focus distance of 0.6 meters, slightly shorter than the Start Helios's MFD of 0.7 meters. As you can see, their bodies are different, the chrome versus the all-black bodies. On the later version, the metal focus ring has been replaced with a rubber ring, as was the fashion at the end of the 1960s. The filter size is also different, 52mm on the early version and 55mm on the later. As well as these changes, the lenses have different aperture controls. The earlier version has a stop-down lever, like the Helios 44M. It's rather discreetly positioned, and it's a lot flimsier than the big switch on the 44M, but it does the job. The camera and lens combined will automatically stop down when you fire the shutter button, so you can focus with the lens wide open and then take a photo at your chosen stop-down position. The later all-black Haiou-64 is more like the Helios 44M4 in that it doesn't have a stop-down switch at all. The stop-down mechanism is built into the camera's controls. The lens remains wide open, regardless of the f-stop, but stops down when you fire the shutter. Now we've looked at the specs, why are these Haiou lenses rumoured to be so impressive? Well, according to some, the glass elements used in the lenses were actually made in East Germany using top-quality glass. I can't confirm if this is 100% true. If anyone watching this video knows more about it, I'll be very interested to hear from you. However, I will make some observations about the rumour based on using the lenses towards the end of the video. Mindful of the impressive claims made for both the Start Helios 44 and the Seagull's Haious, it's time to look at how these lenses perform. I'm not going to do a long and detailed analysis of all aspects of their performance. I'm going to look at some of the key highlights, together with a few comparative analysis of Helios lenses where appropriate, with all the images taken on my Sony a7 IV. Perhaps the most obvious area to investigate first is swirly bokeh, because it's one of the key reasons why these Biotar design lenses are so popular. And this is one of the first photos I took with the Start Helios 44 13 blades version wide open, and I think it's pretty conclusive proof that the lens swirls like an M42 Helios 44. Here are some more examples wide open from my 13 and 8-bladed Helioses. Of course, the different numbers of blades makes no difference to the images wide open. For the Haiou-64, I've read online that the lens may not swirl as much as the Helios 44, and my very first impressions was that the Haiou indeed doesn't seem so keen to swirl. However, I found that at the right distance from the in-focus plane, and with the right background, the Haiou lenses do like to swirl. It's just that as the photographer, you have to try a little harder. Comparing all four lenses, the smart Helios lenses do seem to produce a more clearly defined swirl to the brighter highlights. In these images, I've extracted some more details in post-processing, and again the Helioses have a slightly more fluid sense of swirl. Interestingly, the images also show some clear differences in color tones wide open. The Helios lenses, on the same camera with the same settings, tend to produce a more muted color palette, and their whites and greys are, how can I put it, muddier. We'll see the same differences stopped down, by the way. To further investigate the bokeh bubbles and swirls produced by the lenses, I photographed a collection of bright lights in the background at each lens's minimum focus distance. The defining characteristic of different lenses is how different or similar the shapes of the bubbles are away from the center, and I can't see any difference here. The same is true for the two Haiou lenses, no difference in the rendering of the out-of-focus highlights. Comparing the 13-bladed Helios with the silver Haiou, you can see how the Haiou's slightly shorter minimum focus distance produces slightly larger bubbles in the background. Overall, I feel that the Helios is producing slightly more swirly-looking effect, and this is partly because of those smaller bubbles. When you're trying to produce the most swirly-looking results, it can help to step back from the object in focus a little. The different shapes of the bubbles produced by the two lenses also helps the Helios images look swirlier. The Helios bubbles are flatter, facing towards the center, and this will help give the out-of-focus areas more of an impression of swirl. So how does the Start's Helios 44 compare with the M42 Silver Helios 44? Here's the M42 Helios 44 at its minimum focus distance of 0.55 meters compared to the Start Helios's 0.7 meters, and what a difference this makes. To get a comparative image, I needed to move the camera back. Not a big chore. This was proving to be a fun test. And zooming in, the bubbles look remarkably similar. So similar, I had to double-check my file names. Anyway, to conclude on swirls, it seems the Helios 44's a little swirlier than the Haiou lenses, to which some people might say, good, the Chinese lenses produce less distortion, but of course it's all a matter of taste. Next, onto the sharpness of in-focus areas wide open, and how the lenses render out-of-focus areas, the bokeh in general, not just the bubbles. In terms of center sharpness wide open, and how the out-of-focus blur looks, this is an area where the Helios 44 lenses are surprisingly impressive performers, at least the good copies are. Their center sharpness is something that struck me right from the first time I processed close-up, wide-open images from the Helios 44-2. With a little boost to the contrast and colors, the wide-open images can look very sharp and the transitions and blur can be very beautiful. This is one of my most commented on images from a Helios 44M. The Start Helios 44 follows in this tradition. It's impressively sharp, wide-open, closer up. The bokeh, when you're not trying to capture swirls, is lovely, whether you have a busy background, such as this composition with the 8-bladed lens, or you have a very uncluttered and smooth background. The Haiou-64s also produce excellent center-sharp results wide open. Zooming into this photo, taken wide open and straight out of camera with the early version, you can see how good the lens is. Here's one of my favorite shots from all the lenses in this video. It's also from the early Silver Haiou version. Not only are the in-focus parts very sharp, I really like the in-to-out-of-focus transitions up and down the fence. Looking through my photos taken outdoors with the 4 lenses for this video, there are a significant number of wide-open photos from the Silver Haiou lens that really stand out for their rendering and color. These are just a few examples. There does seem to be something rather special about the glass in this lens. Perhaps the rumor of high-quality glass from East Germany is true after all. Even if it's a fairy story, it's a nice story to relate. The later Haiou lens is also sharp outdoors with attractive blur wide open, although my impression looking through the viewfinder is that the later lens isn't quite as good as the earlier lens, something that I tested more formally indoors with all the lenses. The first thing to notice is the impact of the Haiou lens's closer focus compared to the start Helios's, and how you're getting a slightly narrow depth of field with the Haious. Looking at the center sharpness, all 4 lenses perform well, and zooming in, I think the 2 center sharpest lenses of my copies are the Helios 44 13 blades and the Silver Haiou. And of these 2 lenses, the Haiou is the sharpest wide open. It's very good, not a lot of glowing around the lettering. With the bokeh from these 2 lenses, I really like the way the Helios 44 renders these out-of-focus areas. I think it's very beautiful. The Haiou doesn't quite have the same style, and I prefer the Helios, but we're in very subjective territory here. In these portraits of the 2 lenses on their cameras, I again think the Helios has produced the better bokeh. So how do these 2 lenses compare with the M42 Helios 44 that has 13 blades, and the M42 Helios 44M, as this appears to be the closest lens physically to the Haiou? As we've already seen, the M42 Helios 44 has a much closer MFD than the start Helios, and to me this is a game changer. Regardless of how good the start lens is at rendering wide open, the M42 Helios is the more useful lens to own if you're mostly interested in wide open bokeh shots. The bubbles are bigger and juicier, and the blur is smoother. Next, the comparison between the early Haiou and the M42 Helios 44M. The Helios has 8 blades, compared to the Haiou's 6, but of course this means nothing when it comes to wide open shots. The M42 lens has a marginal advantage with its MFD, 0.55 meters, versus the Haiou's 0.6 meters. Zooming in, I like how both lenses have rendered the out-of-focus blur and the into-out-of-focus transitions. It's rather beautiful, and I'm very happy with the results from both lenses. Wide open, none of these old start Helios and Haiou lenses are good wide open at longer distances to infinity, but you wouldn't expect that. Very few old fast 50s are good at that. You need to stop down. Stop down to f8. Here's a straight out of camera comparison between the 4 lenses. My impression from these shots is that the start Helios 44 lenses render contrasts and colors in a similar way to the early M42 Helioses, i.e. slightly muted. It's no secret that images from early Helios lenses can benefit from a contrast and color boost to help the images appear more natural. If you look at the whites in the main part of the greenhouse, they have a more browner tint than the whites produced by the Haiou lenses. Out of these 4 images, I think the later black Haiou lens has produced the most faithful, accurate colors. Perhaps it has better coatings, or maybe the composition of the glass is different. The tints in the early Silver Haiou, to my eyes, have more of a Maya or Carl Zeiss Jena look. Let's see how good the details are in these images, and I'll zoom into 2 areas. Firstly, the weather vane, a good test of sharpness, and secondly, these windows in the distance, towards the edge of the frame. Zooming into the weather vane, once you get to this level of pixel peeping, you're really dependent on how accurately I've been able to nail the focus with each lens, and I'm going to chicken out of naming the sharpest lens and say that they're all pretty good performers. In terms of sharpness in the central areas stop-down, I'd be happy to use any of these lenses as a vintage, sharp, stop-down walk-around lens, although I will return to this subject in a moment. The next set of images tell a different story when we zoom into the windows in the distance on the right. I've lightened up the images a little so we can see what is going on. 3 of the lenses have performed well, actually very well for old lenses, but the fourth, the Helios 44 13 blades version, has produced a very mushy result, and the lens may be a little decentered. I wonder if this is why the owner of the Start had 2 lenses, that they bought the second 8-bladed Helios 44 after seeing the stop-down edge results from the 13-bladed copy. The intriguing aspect of all this is when I photographed the same scene with my M42 Helios 44 13-bladed lens, it too produced mushy results towards the edge, so maybe these lenses are not decentered, it's just the way they render. If you've used one of these lenses, I'd be very interested to hear whether the edges are soft to stop down, or whether it's just my own copies of the lenses. Personally, I'm not too fussed about these edge results. Indeed, I sometimes prefer a slightly soft look to the edges, even in stop-down shots, as it helps to add a 3D effect. However, I completely understand why this could be an issue if you're into infinity landscape or astro shots, where edge-to-edge sharpness is critical. One other important point to make in stop-down comparisons is the impact of the number of aperture blades on images as you begin to stop down, where there are out-of-focus highlights. Lining up the Start Helios 44s, either side of the M42 Helios 44, you can see the shapes created by the 8 and 13 aperture blades when the lenses are set to f4. It's interesting how much wider the aperture is at f4 on the Start 13-bladed lens compared to the M42 Helios. In theory, the Start lens is going to be capturing more light at that setting. To show you what happens when you stop down the Start lenses, I took these videos, and with the 13-bladed lens, it's impressive how round the bubbles remain as you stop down. The 8 blades of the other Helios 44 are very clearly in view when you get to f4. Here are the Haious and their closest Helios counterparts, and by f4 there's going to be quite a noticeable impact on out-of-focus highlights from the 6-bladed lenses. Even the Helios 44M, with 2 extra blades, produces very definitive geometric shapes. In terms of choosing the best lenses for stop-down photos, I'd normally say the lens with more blades would be better stop-down, with rounder bokeh bubbles if you have strong out-of-focus highlights, but for my copies of the 2 Helios lenses, the 8-bladed version performs better edge-to-edge, and I think this is more important than the shape of the bubbles. Overall, I found my Haiou black version performed the best of the 4 lenses stopped down in terms of sharpness, colours and contrasts, and this may well reflect better coatings on the newer lens. For my final set of comparisons, I took the 2 top lenses, the black Haiou and the 8-bladed Start Helios, out for a walk with their M42 Helios counterparts, a silver Helios 44 and a Helios 44 M4. Looking at the results for sharpness and colour rendering at f8, the 2 top lenses were the Haiou and the Helios 44 M4, with the Helios just edging the Haiou based on pixel peeping in this and the next set of photos. I was particularly interested to see how the Start Helios 44 compared with the silver M42 Helios 44, and I think the Start Helios is a tad better. I was focusing each lens on this head. However, the differences are not so great that I could say definitively that the Start Helios is the better lens. Talking of heads, all these lenses make rather good portrait lenses, wide open with swirly backgrounds, if that's what you're looking for, or stop down. This one was taken at f5.6. Back to the comparison shots for a moment. I found it surprisingly difficult to achieve consistent results in terms of exposure levels across the different lenses, even though they're all 58mm f2 lenses. So I decided to try an experiment where I set the camera to the same settings, f8 at 1/1000th of a second and ISO 100, and these were the results. Clearly, the Haiou lenses are not pulling in as much light as the other lenses. The old silver version in particular is considerably darker. and I thought the start Helios 13 blades might have been even lighter, given what we saw earlier with the size of the aperture openings, but it isn't. One other point to make about these lenses is that the lenses with better coatings do tend to perform better in high contrast situations. These two images were taken on the camera's recommended settings, and the start Helios 44 8 blades version really hasn't handled the lighter columns very well. They're almost blown. The Haiou, possibly with more advanced coatings, isn't that much better. And if you're looking for a Helios-style swirly lens that is good in these high-contrast situations, you'd be advised to go for the later versions, such as the Helios 44M7. I've had a lot of fun with these rarer lenses, and they reminded me how much I enjoy using Biotar Design 58 f2s on both full-frame and crop sensors. Based on my copies, I'd say the Start Helios 13 blades version and the Haiou-64 early silver version are the best lenses for wider open compositions, and if you're looking for the most swirly lens, I'd go for the Helios. If you're more interested in stop-down photography at longer distances, my Start Helios 8-bladed lens and the later black version of the Haiou were the best options. Of these, the Haiou is the winner for me, as the sharpness and colours were most impressive, and I could quite believe that these lenses use superior glass from East Germany, even if that's not true in reality. Leaving aside the rumours about these lenses being so special when they were produced, I don't think they are necessarily the best of the best old Biotar copies to buy today. Comparing the Start Helios 44 with the M42 Silver Helios didn't suggest one is significantly better than the other, and the M42 version is, in my opinion, the better choice, as it has a shorter minimum focus distance, and it's much easier to adapt to modern digital cameras. And while I really like the rendering and colour produced by the Haiou lenses, they have excellent glass. Are they any better than the later Helios 44 series lenses? No, I don't think they are. I'll end with a photo of my M42 Cosmogon. It's a rebranded Helios 44M made for export. It's also rumoured to be the pick of the M44 lenses produced by the Soviets. But I have to say, there's a part of me that thinks the very best lenses off the production line might just have been reserved for senior domestic apparatchiks, not others. On that note, I hope you've enjoyed this video. Any comments or suggestions or corrections are most welcome, and until the next time, all the best.